The Ratchet & Clank series has a special place in my heart. You know when you're a youngin' and you play what's essentially handed to you or already lying around? The Ratchet & Clank games were some of the first games I went out of my own way to buy all by myself like a big boy. I quite literally grew up with these games, from the PS2 to the 3 to the 4 to finally the 5 this year. I know these games inside and out, and above that, they played a huge role in me getting into gaming and understand what it is I find enjoyable in a game. Needless to say, this series is pretty meaningful for me. That being said, I don't know if I can call myself a Ratchet & Clank fan anymore. One can only watch for so long as their once beloved series publicly and viscerally dissolves piece by piece until only a garish facsimile remains. With every new entry, the Ratchet & Clank series has progressively lost more and more of its original character, charm, and overall quality. What was once a witty and novel sci-fi knockabout has been shaved down and had all its various parts replaced until it's become almost the exact opposite of the original vision. It's not even that it's unrecognizable now, it's that the series is recognizable as the very kind of product the first games would ridicule. And just to be clear, when talking about this decline, I am talking about the whole series, not just like the spin-off era that no one likes, or the PSP games that we all know are poo-poo. Because if you step back and look at even the first sequel, this has been a long time coming. With the release of Rift Apart upon us, I thought it might be worthwhile to do a sort of retrospective of the Ratchet & Clank series, to look back on what made the original games so memorable and what's been lost to diminishing returns over the years. This is going to be a series of videos, with this first one starting at the beginning with the PS2 Ratchet games. In the next one, I'll take a look at the mainline PS3 entries, and then finally, the big one. But first, we gotta go back to 2002. Before we get started, a couple things I want to mention. Firstly, although this video will be about the Ratchet games released on PS2, all the footage you'll be seeing is from the PS3 HD ports, which, ain't ideal. These versions of the games, while still completely playable, have loads of obvious visual glitches and hiccups that either didn't exist in the originals or were appropriately covered up by the original aspect ratio, so, you're gonna see some weird stuff, and I apologize for that. Blame the janky-ass ports in this terrible main menu. Who approved this? Additionally, while I'm not going to get into painstaking detail, I am going to talk about the plots of all these games, so expect some casual spoilers to drop every now and then. Nothing personal, you understand, just business. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get this show rolling. The story of Ratchet & Clank begins right at the title screen. Ratchet's a little mechanic guy trying to build a ship so he can finally travel off the planet he's been stuck on, but turns out he's missing the last component he needs to get it running. Feels bad indeed. Meanwhile, a factory planets away is churning out warbots for use by an insidious business bloke named Chairman Drek, whose plan to build his people a new home involves tearing apart existing planets and stitching together a new one out of the planetary chunks and half-burnt corpses.
Unfortunately, this change in mass will cause your planet to spin out of control and drift into the sun, where it will explode into a flaming ball of gas, but of course, sacrifices must be made.
As fate would have it, however, the factory spits out a reject who we'll call Clank, for that's what they call him. With much nicer intentions than the rest of his kind, Clank discovers Drek's wicked plot and makes his escape, which results in him crash landing on Ratchet's planet. Clank wants to find someone who can stop Drek, Ratchet wants to travel off-world, and since Clank's got the missing piece to get Ratchet's ship running, the two set off on an adventure of galactic proportions. Something I've always really appreciated about the first Ratchet & Clank game is that it's actually a game about Ratchet and Clank and their relationship. Plenty of the game's contemporaries would involve a group of 2 or 3 friends, but it was never really a focus for them. It was always like, I've been friends forever, they'll stay friends, who cares? But in Ratchet & Clank, the relationship between the titular duo is front and center. This is literally the first time they're meeting.
Interesting.
We get to watch them bond and see their interactions evolve as they spend more time together and start to understand one another on a more personal level. Clank's quite naive and focused on doing right, almost to a fault, while Ratchet's a bit cocksure and self-interested. Of course he is, he's been stuck on a barren rock all his life and is raring to see all this glamorous galaxy life he's seen on TV. And Clank was literally born yesterday. This lends every interaction involving the two loads of character. The two of them react in different ways to every NPC they cross.
Actually, I build robots. I myself am not a robot guy, per se.
Nerd. I like him.
When given the coordinates to a new planet via a little video played on an infobot, the two will have different takeaways from what they just saw.
Did you see that?
Yes, I hope that poor woman is all right.
She's fine, I think. I was talking about the hoverboard races.
They'll even argue if some planets are worth visiting when they both want different things. As friendly as they start out, as the story develops, the two characters' goals start pulling them in opposite directions. Self-interested as he is, Ratchet resents Clank when the little guy's focus on Drek gets them in a spot of trouble, and he wants to set out on matters of personal revenge. Meanwhile, Clank still got the best interests of the galaxy in mind and starts resenting Ratchet for being too stubborn to let go and focus on the real threat. But Ratchet can't travel without Clank, and Clank can't save the day without Ratchet's help, meaning they're effectively trapped together, for better and for worse. There are some points in this game in which the two are so vicious to each other, you almost wonder if they're gonna end this journey as friends.
We'll go just long enough to pick up the O2 mask.
Perhaps the extra oxygen will help your brain to function properly.
Yeah, and maybe the salt water will rust your mouth shut.
There's a moment in the ending, this catch-of-breath moment in which the day is won and Ratchet walks off alone. That's it. You can see it in Clank's face. It's over, isn't it? Each character got what they wanted, and now he's alone.
Hey, Tin Can!
Seeing Ratchet come back for Clank is not only narratively satisfying, but genuinely heartwarming. Thanks to Clank, Ratchet has gradually transformed from this abrasive, selfish gun nut to a more mature-minded fellow who finally thinks to look at what's happening outside his own personal bubble and lend a hand to help. They've been through so much, of course they're sticking together from here on out. Their friendship has so much weight and importance when they go through these trials and tribulations. And it's not like some super legendary storytelling or whatever. It's tropey buddy film stuff stapled onto a Star Wars, but it's handled about as well as it can be. The game really feels like two dudes on an adventure through a huge galaxy, learning and growing from one another, and that interpersonal drama makes for a great anchor the rest of the narrative can orbit around. Orbit. That's a space pun for all you space fans out there, and it does feel like a huge galaxy. Every time you go to a new level, you have to select the planet manually, and then you get treated to some cool flyby shots of making the trip. It's a disguised loading screen, yeah, but it makes things feel like one big adventure. You visit so many planets in this game, and each feels super unique with not only different architecture, color palettes, and an absolute banger of a backing soundtrack, but unique enemy types and friendly NPC characters that give you glimpses into the social ecosystems of every world. It's amazing what you can pack into just a 15-second interaction. But no matter where you go, some things never change, and that's change, if you know what I'm talking about. Cash! Moolah! The legalist of tender. Oh, you're saving the galaxy? Well, what's in it for me? It doesn't matter who you talk to or the circumstances, we all gotta be making that money.
How about I sell you these? At cost.
Sell? After we just saved your scrawny butt?
All right. I'll give you the employee discount too.
Themes of consumerism and self-absorption pump through every aspect of this game like blood through an animal. No matter where you go or what you do, you're gonna have to pay to progress. The best way to get money is by destroying everything around you, and then using that money to buy more weapons to destroy even more things. The cycle keeps going, and it's the omnipresent corporation benefiting from its own firearm economy. The main bad guy's motive is pure greed on this scale.
Who do you think polluted our last world? I did. You see, I've been paid for every square inch of my new world. Once the inhabitants move in, I will begin polluting this world as well. Then the whole thing starts all over again.
It's not the most profound stance ever taken by a sci-fi narrative, but it works with how all in the game is about making that point. Everyone's in it for the money, and don't act like you're any different. Look at all those weapons. You want them, don't you? Of course you do. And then you do buy a weapon, and you don't even get a full clip of ammo with it. That's how far we go in this game, full-on buy the charger separately. There's this real workman's sci-fi feel about the game that gives it a special gritty charm. For all the glitz and glam promised by the advertisements we see on the infobots, you get to the planet itself and it's so normal. You talk to the inhabitants and there's not even ambient music, just dry cinematography that lets the characters' larger-than-life personalities speak for themselves. And the people you come across are just dudes, employees and working-class chaps and chapettes who need to make ends meet. All the weapons are just hunks of metal bolted together. Hell, the money unit itself is bolts. It really feels like you're rooting around at the bottom of the food chain, just guys being dudes getting by on a system designed around personal gain. It gives this game this snarky edge that sticks with you no matter where you go, and it turns the galaxy into a character in and of itself, while threading in nicely with the interpersonal conflict faced by the main duo, itself a conflict rooted in self-interest. Before they can save the galaxy, they need to learn to save each other. I'll bet you didn't expect me to have 4 whole paragraphs worth of talking on the narrative content on this baby baba jumping game, did you? All the themes of the story are present in every fractal, every interaction in detail in the atmosphere, and indeed every part of the gameplay. It makes everything about the game feel authentically realized and gives the game a strong sense of identity. And helps that the baby baba jumping part of the game is also really good. Gameplay-wise, Ratchet & Clank is a sort of 3D platformer hybrid, with an equal focus on exploration and firearm combat. You go from planet to planet with a new goal in mind for each one, destroying any enemies you come across, then using the bolts you gather along the way, you buy new weapons, or sometimes the way forward itself. The order in which you unlock said planets is somewhat linear, but only to an extent. See, you touch down on a planet and immediately you're faced with 2 or 3 ways you can go without an obvious, quote, right path, unquote. It's on you to just pick one and see where it might lead. It could lead you to your objective, maybe you'll discover something you'll need for later progression, or maybe it'll be a completely optional path leading you to a cool gizmo. There really is no way to know what you might find, which makes it really exciting to just explore. And then the paths will loop back to the start of the level, making everything feel interconnected like one big place. Oh, it's beautiful. And it gives a lot of agency to progression. You'll often have 2 planets available at once, and rarely is it clear which one's the main one. And because the branching paths themselves are so contained, you'll never be stuck for long if you just look at where you haven't been. Push even further beyond, however, and you'll find some of the most dastardly secrets around. A lot of gold bolts you can collect are hidden in plain sight or tucked away in places you would never think to go, but they all reward thinking outside the box or simply having fun and messing around. Some of these secrets I didn't even know existed until the PS3 HD collection. The Metropolis gold bolt under this platform you might not even be aware is there. The gold bolt on Orkson requiring you to visibomb through this tunnel to open up a path on the other side of the level. This is devious in the best possible way. If you're just the kind to head straight through the story though, there's still plenty of treats on the main path. The game doesn't hold back. There's actually some pretty difficult portions of the game that really test your platforming skills, but also your multitasking skills by requiring combat at the same time. Not even each level, each branch blends the 2 disciplines in a bunch of different ways, some leaning one way, some leaning towards another. The constant unique gameplay identities you can ascribe to each makes every planet feel fresh. Take one of my favorites, Blackwater City on planet Rilgar. You have the main path, which takes you through an infested city, pitting you against no less than 3 different types of enemies. Another path ending in a mad dash through a sewer system rapidly filling with water, a hoverboard track, some random dude on the street selling the most expensive and powerful weapon in the galaxy. Even on the planets that are fairly linear, like Umbrus, you have platforming combined with automated turrets, heat-seeking mines, puzzle mechanics, tanks filled with deadly sharks you have to drain and refill, and then you finally face off against this huge boss bigger than any enemy you've fought up to that point. Simply being varied is one thing. Having a bunch of different mechanics that are all fun and fully realized is another, and Ratchet & Clank is definitely in the latter category. I don't think there's a single bad level in this entire game. Some parts are duller than others, sure, but the pacing stays so brisk that you'll never be stuck in one place for too long. With so much consideration in the design of every encounter to make every level, every challenge therein feel like it counts. As the game goes on, it really feels like the game starts testing you more and more on what you've learned through an excellent difficulty curve that culminates in a great final level, combining everything you've had to do throughout the game with loads of tough-as-nails enemies and a final boss that'll really test your mettle. But honestly, some of the best levels are those like Poketaru that just let you vibe, swimming around, not a care in the world. The game strikes a great balance in terms of letting you soak in the sights and expecting some real effort out of you. Never getting frustrating, but being demanding enough at times to make victory feel earned. Of course, victory would come a lot easier if you spent a bit more money, huh? More health, more weapons, anything catch your eye? The weakest part of the gameplay is probably the combat, mainly because it's pretty simple. Look at the guy, hit circle, there you go. If you're feeling frisky, you can aim the weapon yourself with a limited first-person mode, you strategic mastermind, you. The more you play, the more bolts you collect, the more weapons you can buy from the omnipresent vendors. All of the weapons you unlock can provide you with tons of different strategies. The Pyrocitor, for example, is a flamethrower that's really useful for crowds. Or you could just break out the Blaster, a good mid-range all-rounder. Or how about the Devastator, a rocket launcher great for doing hefty damage on a single target. And then you have weapons like the Agents of Doom or the Decoy Glove, which are useful in diverting your enemy's attention or just hitting them while they're distracted. My favorite is the Visibomb gun. It's a sort of like RC drone missile that you can pilot all over the level and take out enemies from super far away. This is so cool. This game came out in 2002, I'll remind you. Why is this cooler than 90% of stuff in games today? But whatever tools you prefer, you have a lot of options. Not every weapon is all that great and the mechanics themselves are limited, but it adds an additional level of thought to the gameplay, gives a good sense of progression as your arsenal builds bigger and bigger and the enemies you fight get badder and badder, and hey, who doesn't like blowing things up in a video game? Some segments also let you play as little robo-boy Clank. As opposed to Ratchet's running and gunning style, Clank's levels are slower, more methodical, often requiring you to carefully lead little robots into a series of hazards. They're maybe a little too slow, but they set up a nice contrast between the characters through gameplay. I especially enjoy Orkson, the main bad guy's home planet, polluted to the point at which it's too dangerous for Ratchet to leave the ship, so you explore as Clank. Then you unlock the O2 mask so you can play as Ratchet, and suddenly the levels opened up so much bigger than before. It gives a good sense of scale in more ways than one. The swimming levels, even the swimming levels are fun. That's how good this game is. Now, is Ratchet & Clank a perfect game? Hell nah. There's some input lag no matter which version you play, targeting's screwed, there's a severely limited quick select, there can be real bastardy checkpoints for no real reason, and some of the variety sure is. And admittedly, the game doesn't do anything revolutionary or all that new. It's mainly just a collection of tropes and familiar bits of genre, but it's still one of my all-time favorites because everything about it just goes. The story, the gameplay, the graphics and aesthetics, everything feels like it's at the same wavelength. The platforming segments melt and flow into the combat just right. The big wide worlds and high stakes together with the small personal stakes between the lead characters. From top to bottom, the game feels like a solid, fully realized vision with heart, with a message, and a good deal of sass. Truthfully, there are other games that can do what Ratchet & Clank do, but not a lot of games that do it like Ratchet & Clank do it. Memorable characters, engaging world, fun gameplay, cheap soda. Don't know about you, but sounds like a classic to me. So, what's next? Ratchet 2 is a game that really needs no introduction. This one is often considered by many to not only be the best Ratchet game, but one of the best games on the PS2 full stop. Do I agree? Well, no, but it's still a fun game. Definitely a bigger game than Ratchet 1. More levels, more cutscenes, more plot, more mechanics, more hit points, more weapons, more two-set weapons, more shoes for Ratchet to wear. There's a lot of stuff here, and a lot of good stuff, don't get me wrong. But this is also where the overall design definitely starts to shift in a less cool direction. Things don't line up quite as neatly as they did in Ratchet 1. First things first, the story is just not as strong as the first games, though it puts a good foot forward. Riding high after bodying Drek, Ratchet and Clank are feeling like pretty hot shit and are looking to hire themselves out for some heroing. Sure enough, a CEO from another galaxy enlists them into helping retrieve a stolen project, sending them on another galaxy-spanning adventure. Great! Ratchet 1 liked to take the piss out of the idea of the celebrity status and general distrust of the glamour put across by ultimately corporate entities. And sure enough, it turns out the corporation hiring them, the absolute monopoly of a weapon manufacturer keeping you nice and supplied with tools of destruction, is the actual bad guy, and it's on Ratchet and Clank to ditch the glitz and glam they once rebelled against and get back to who they once were to save the day. We're bringing down the man. Bish, bash, clap, clap, clap. Very nice, very good. So what happens to just not make it quite click into place? I think, honestly, it mostly comes down to the ending. The best way I can put it is that Ratchet 2's story just becomes something else at the end. Spoiler alert, I'm gonna talk about the ending. Look out, hurry, mute it, it's coming up! So it turns out that the CEO of the corporation is actually Captain Quark, a character from the first game, deliberately releasing the untested and wildly dangerous product for the sake of starting a fiasco so he can stage a heroic comeback. Chicanery! A ruse! Of course, Ratchet saves the day, Quark gets... we'll just call it consequences. Clank gets a girlfriend or something, and everyone just kinda goes home.
And so the story decided to end.
Just to be clear, the twist doesn't ruin the story at all, no way, no how. And I actually do like the twist, because I like Quark as a character.
Come on, Quark, I know it's you.
The name's Steve. Pleased to meet you. Thank you, and have a Quark-tastic day.
What'd you say?
Nothing.
But you can tell him being put into the story was a last-minute thing, you know? Thematically speaking, he's not laced in there quite so tightly. I mean, like, he did a naughty thing and gets his comeuppance, great. But what about Megacorp? We see the real CEO at the ending and he's all like, "Thank you for releasing me." And then we just kinda forget about him. There's a sort of implicit heel turn by this twist in which we go from shouldn't have blindly trusted that corporation to nah, man, the corporation was actually a good guy, it was just the one bad guy. Doesn't feel like it follows through with what's set up before is my point, both by this game and the first, so it just ends on a sort of weird note. Plus the final boss fight is trash, but that's another issue entirely. I think the other thing is that the story doesn't feel like it has that second level the first games does, with its focus on Ratchet & Clank's interpersonal drama. Not that going Commando needed more of that, of course. Ratchet & Clank are obviously going to be good bros at this point, so it's good that the plot doesn't BS some reason to get them fighting again. There's still an enjoyable sense of just being a pair of dudes having a grand adventure through a sprawling and varied galaxy, with a good camaraderie between the leads. It's just not like that personal stuff anymore, so it doesn't feel like it's clocking in on more cylinders than the one, you feel me? It's a bit less their story, you dig? We coastin' instead of cruising, you feel me? What am I saying? This is also where Ratchet's character starts to slip a little bit. One of the prevailing criticisms of the first Ratchet & Clank was how abrasive Ratchet's personality can be. And yeah, I'll concede that sometimes that side of him gets pushed a little too far to the point at which he just seems petty.
He needs our help.
Yeah? Why don't you go help him? Into another trap? Well, go on. Go fight some evil.
But I think Insomniac Games has overcorrected way too hard since then. I mean, it's like I said, Ratchet & Clank have gotten through their rough patch. Ratchet doesn't really have a reason to get to that level anymore. He's gonna be more mellow no matter what you do. The boy's still got plenty of spice.
Is it dangerous?
Actually, yes it is.
Good.
But now he also has moments in which he weirdly doesn't. Pull out your gun, Ratchet, your gun! Where are you going? He's more passive generally, to the point of almost feeling like a non-entity in certain scenes. Like, in-game, he doesn't even change faces when you pull out different guns anymore. It's like he doesn't even care. He's more likable in a general sense, perhaps, but when a character's primary activity is merciless slaughter, sanding down the edges doesn't sit quite right. Especially considering how much more going Commando leans into combat this time around. Plenty of twists and sprinkles have been added onto the first game's formula, first and foremost a much girthier arsenal of weapons with loads more destructive power than anything in the first game, barring the Rhino of course. Ideal for mowing down quintuple the amount of enemies you'd faced before. In addition, Ratchet's much snappier to control. He's a lot lighter and less laggy, allowing for much faster twitch reactions. This comes bundled with a much easier strafing feature. The first game had strafing, but only on the thruster pack, and you had to like double tap crouch and then hold another button and send in a mail-in rebate. Yeah, it was clumsy and kinda baffling. Now you just hold L2 or R2. Bravissimo! Though the same can't be said for jumping while strafing, which tends to throw off your aim and locks you into very fixed momentum. And it can be annoying in later missions having to hold a shoulder button and like keep wiggling between aiming and hitting circle for what feels like every fight. How about we give it a B+. It definitely feels like there's a lot more happening on a per second basis this go around, and it can actually be pretty challenging if you don't pay for all the weapons and armor like a good little consumer. Although they're not all winners, truth be told, and the balance is all kinds of scuffed. A lot of weapons overlap and overshadow each other quite a bit, like the Synthenoids and the Turglove, which both function as just press the button and then forget about it, or the Bouncer versus any other explosive weapon, or indeed any weapon in any game ever. Some of them feel useless once you get far enough in the game, or even right as you unlock them, with how high damage scaling can get. As much as I want to give the game the benefit of the doubt that this is like some planned obsolescence scheme, there's just enough variation in how the weapons work to the point I don't feel like the intention was, look, it's the Mini Nuke 2, upgrade now! Overall, I don't really feel like many of the weapons stand out the way they did in the first game when they all had pretty much unique functions and useful applications. I feel like I use every weapon in Going Commando the same way and just pointing it at the thing fronting on me and mashing away at the circle button. I get it, it's a faster game. No time to think when you have 30 million bullets screaming your way. And it's fun, yeah, and it's easy to get overwhelmed. It's good. You don't need careful planning messing up that flow. It's just the slight pivot into twitchier combat gives the game a different feel to the first. Not a uniformly bad feel, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss being more careful in considering how each individual weapon functions to create some funky strategy. What can I say? I'm a thinking man. I'm the weirdo that enjoys the Visibomb and the spider thing this game has. Perhaps the most substantial and awkward addition is the very light RPG mechanics Going Commando introduces, which have gone on to become a series standard. It's simple, really. Use a weapon to gain XP for that weapon. Gain enough XP and the weapon will level up. It's the model all the Ratchet games use going forward, but I've never actually liked this system, and here's why. You spend all this time using a new weapon, getting a feel for it, and then you finally upgrade it to the point it gets a cool new function or feature, and now instantly it doesn't feel like there's a point to using it anymore. The primary motivator for using a weapon isn't out of strategy or creative thinking, it's to arbitrarily max out its numbers. You put so much time into building a big arsenal only to use like 2 or 3 weapons at a time. You can still earn general XP to gradually buff up your health bar, but you get the same general XP if you use a weapon that still needs its own personal XP. So if anything, using maxed out gear feels like a waste, or at the very least a last resort. It just seems like an artificial way to enforce a sense of variety. I think this system also contributes to the enemy encounter design in certain areas being pretty dull, considering that with this system a player might want to use any weapon anywhere. So there's a more generic design throughout the game focused around corridors and ambushes that just lack a certain something. Or it leads to outright terrible levels like Snivelac, which just besiege you from every angle with super linear sequences of aggravating encounters. Like, areas in the first game made you fight a bunch of dudes but also manage platforming at the same time. It felt like more of blending the two elements of gameplay rather than taking turns. And it's not like Ratchet 2 is devoid of sections like these, especially near the start of the game, but it definitely leans away the more you play. What with 2 whole battle arenas dedicated solely to combat and 2 massive wasteland levels with nothing to do in them but to shoot the things that are in them. And the final level might as well have a careful hand on your shoulder pushing you along. In terms of all of this, I think Going Commando is far from the worst offender. In fact, I think it was the next game that really put it over the edge. But it's still a recurring element of the games I'm going to have to touch on, and I think it planted the seeds early on for what makes later games so dissatisfying. Going Commando definitely has some of the glimmers that made the first game so good. The thing is, whenever I think back on all those good things, it just feels like I kinda have to cherry pick. Be honest, Ratchet fans, when thinking about the cool platforming bits of Going Commando, do you not just think of the dynamo wall on Joba and not much else? Cutscene-wise, does anything truly remarkable spring to mind besides the whole now the computers are charging us bit? Do you know what the whole Clank Stalker girlfriend thing was on about? 'Cause I have no bloody clue what that's on about. The joke is over, I'm legitimately asking. Beneath the standout moments, I feel like things get really blurry. The game really lacks the considered approach to its levels that the first game had when so much of this one is just fight the guys. Even the ship combat just feels like wait for an enemy to show up in front of you. The game as a whole is more direct than the first, and in some ways, that's great, cut out the chaff. But in others, it means that Ratchet 2 just lacks the same layers of engagement that made the first such a classic. The first game feels like a cohesive vision, but Going Commando suffers from a number of cracks in the shell. More combat, but less edge. More direction, but less purpose. It's still a good time, but not quite a great time. But it's at least fun to run through again with one of the best New Game Plus systems in all of PlayStation history. Going Commando lays the basis for what's become the staple model for the Ratchet & Clank New Game Plus, and it's a real humdinger. In addition to what you might expect, i.e. more upgrade options for weapons on top of tougher enemies, Going Commando gives you a bolts multiplier that increases the more enemies you kill up to a maximum of times 20. However, if you get hit, the multiplier falls all the way back to 1. This I like. It's a great way to quickly catch up on all the weapons and armor you missed out on the first go round, and not only incentivizes playing well, but also playing with all those weapons you're stockpiling, since the best way to not get hit is to ensure not a single organism in the room remains unvaporized. Combined with all the fancy unlockables on offer, this is a game you can't play through just once, and I think that's always a good thing. So yeah, Ratchet 2, plenty of style, some real highlights, decent enough, but not quite hitting the same way as Game 1, you know? Of course I kvetch and complain and nitpick, but it doesn't get much better after this. I'm gonna be blunt about this. I am not a fan of Up Your Arsenal. I know it's Metacritic's favorite and all, but I'm just not about it. To me, it's always felt like a really half-assed Ratchet game that, while not entirely poo-poo, kinda misses the point of what made the first 2 games fun. First off, the story's kinda bad. Starts off well enough, I guess. Ratchet and Clank, well, mostly Clank, have their own big show, all glamming it up with a celebrity lifestyle, and it's like, cool, that's something the other games were kind of about. And then that fake-ass glamour is how people recognize Ratchet and Clank, as opposed to their legit accomplishments.
How are things on the front lines, soldier? Is that Secret Agent Clank?
Cool, social commentary. But then in comes Dr. Nefarious, the main bad guy, whose plan is like he's super racist or something and wants to turn all organic life forms into robots, even though he once was an organic life form himself. And it turns out he's only evil because he was bullied by Quark in high school. Then we start doing like a jokey war piece thing with this robot army. And then the bad guy thinks that Clank's show is real. Robot Britney Spears. Monkey? There's just no consistent theming anymore. We're all over the friggin' road here. What are we making fun of? Politics? Celebrities? Hollywood? War dramas? Monkey? The entire 90s at once? All of them. But, actually, none of them. Because it's all just jokes! And I'll grant you that it probably wouldn't have been very becoming to make a villain who's a villain despite having genuine grievances with the treatment of his race. But when there's never really been any sort of disparity between the treatment of robot characters and organic characters in any of the previous games, and indeed this game as well, it just feels like a left-field LOL random motive. But weirdly, no one calls him out on talking out of his chrome-plated arse, so is there something there? What? Why are we not talking about this? The focused, biting satire of Game 1, and partially Game 2, has been swapped out, for a bunch of scattered pop culture references and general whackiness that are altogether too scattershot to amount to anything of substantive meaning. It doesn't feel like anything gets accomplished by the credits except the basic "the day is saved" routine and a spot of development for Quark. We don't even learn why Nefarious is teaming up with the very squishy and very organic Tyrannoids. Ratchet and Clank take part in the plot, but it doesn't really feel like they drive it this time around. It's less a planet-hopping intergalactic adventure between two dudes, and now it's a focused hero story with a larger suite of secondary characters. But at the cost of losing that feel of a big galaxy full of unique places and faces. Those one-off characters always gave the first game so much charm. The galaxy itself was a character before, but now it's barely set dressing. Like, why are we even buying weapons anymore? Firearm economy and omnipresent industry was always a core part of the first two games' stories and worlds, but now it's incidental. The consumeristic tendencies of the world itself start to feel taken for granted here, and it only goes downhill from there. At the very least, the exceptionally dry style of in-engine cutscenes is preserved, which I always felt lent a nice contrast to the hyper-produced advertisements and programs we'd see. This style is awesome for letting raw characterization speak for itself. If only Ratchet & Clank had any this game. More character, at least, than backpedaling from raunchy humor.
My daughter tells me you're a man who's good with his hands, Ratchet.
Sir, I swear
Maybe I'm overthinking things. Maybe we just want to do the straightforward hero thing now. It's just a bit of wacky flavor added in. Sure, whatever, go for it. But you know, last games that did that, plus a lot of other things too. That was also cool. It's not a complete wash. It may be all jokes now, but they're not awful jokes.
It was mating season. How could I have known she was your sister?
Nefarious's motives may be all over the place, but he is delectably hammy, and an iconic series villain for a reason. And then you have Nefarious's butler Lawrence, who is just an absolute treasure.
That moron could never hope to match wits with the likes of me.
If anyone can beat a moron at his own game, it's you, sir.
And having a bit of a redemption arc for Quark, while maybe not perfectly handled, is overall cool, and gives a sort of narrative flow to the trilogy. So that's nice. Just doesn't come close to all them personal notes from before, you know? Guess we're just wacky space game Ratchet now. That's cool. But it's really the gameplay that really does this game in for me. Good gollies, this game's so much more boring than the first two. The adventurous, explorative identity from the first couple of Ratchet games is all gone now. A hallmark of the first two games, the branching paths, yeah, that's not really a thing in up your arsenal. In Ratchet 3, there's only like 3, maybe 4 levels with optional paths, if you can count Hollow Star Studios' tacked-on titanium bolt thing as its own path. Pretty much every other planet in the game is basically one linear path. Start at one end, shimmy over the other, boom, that's lunch, people! You might think, oh well, maybe the linear path is just all the content you'd otherwise have just filed in a nice little row. Well, no, not really. Plenty of planets in their entirety are literally equivalent to a single branch in a normal Ratchet level, and most don't even get that far. There are planets in this game that aren't even levels, they're just singular battle arenas on loan from the multiplayer. How is that exciting? And then they back you out after every mission to make you manually pick the next one? You're gonna sit there and tell me that this is the best Ratchet game? Even if you do make the linearly stacking content argument for the more robust planets, there's said content being stacked. There's really no way around it. Ratchet 3's a shooter. We're a shooter now, straight up. Third-person shooter, vaguely bullet hell, shooter. Sure, there's a bit of platforming sprinkled around, but it's pretty much there just to connect the fights. Killing enemies isn't just part of the gameplay now, it's all of the gameplay. And you know what? I'm cool with that. Seriously, I welcome that. I would even say that Up Your Arsenal is fun, with the premier strategy being always moving and hoping you're moving out of the way of the bullets. And with how many bullets there can be at times, combat requires a degree of attention and dexterity without being super demanding in what it expects from you, giving the game an ideal balance of being easy to sink into without being totally mind-numbing, with a slew of cool new weapons to play around with. But it still controls like you'd want a platformer to control, so the end result is really wishy-washy. All the issues I talked about in going Commando, the awkward strafe jumping, the constant claw gripping to strafe aim and fire, it's all there. And it's more of a persistent issue given how much more of the game will be spent in combat. At least you can opt for a lock strafe control scheme, which I highly recommend. The camera being much more stiff will take some adjusting to, and the fixed strafe jumping's still not ideal, but at least you'll cut down on the finger gymnastics. I should warn you though that for whatever reason, using the gravity boots on elaborate walkways while using this control type will give the camera friggin' conniptions, so if you're easily motion sick, you might have to tap out and enjoy your arthritis. I still don't like the whole use the weapon to level it up system for all the same reasons I mentioned before, but in Up Your Arsenal it's even worse, because the weapons have 5 whole levels. That's even more time you put into a weapon, getting so many various upgrades for it, and then you finally max it out and gain an exciting new feature. Alright, pack it in, time to move on to the next one. Like, this is the good part, but now it's not worth using. And because of all these different level tiers, damage scaling in this game is straight jank. Look how many shots it takes to kill this one guy. This is a level 4 starting gun, not even halfway through the game. He's not even flinching. That's another thing, the enemies. Where's the variety? You have like 2 planets with unique enemy types, the rest is all the same handful of tyrannoids, robots, ninjas, little one-hit drone things over and over again throughout the entire game. There's enough padding in the game that you'll spend about as much time at it as you would in the other Ratchet games, but all that time facing these same guys over and over in levels that are all linear sequences of ambushes, it just feels like there's so much less to see and do in Up Your Arsenal. There are no truly standout moments when every level feels like it's just the same set of encounters, just staggered out differently. See, my problem is that we're leaning into the action side of the established series gameplay, but we're not actually evolving the design around the action to the point where it feels like an action game. The guise of being an explorative platformer is still here through the controls, through the level design, even through the occasional puzzle gadget, but it's not in service of anything other than bridging the fights together. Even the hacking minigame isn't a puzzle or anything, it's just like Gradius or something. You have these levels like Tyrannosis or parts of Iridia that seem like these huge places fit for exploration with various vehicles, but all these bits boil down to following waypoints on your minimap. There's no sense of adventure, but the combat isn't slick or engaging enough to make up for it. The gameplay just feels stale. Also, the game's friggin' ugly. Okay, well maybe not ugly, but it's still pretty dog. Bland, washed out colors, basically no attention to lighting whatsoever, missing animations, garish menu design. It looks worse than both games that came before it. Indeed, you actually go to places from the first game, and it's like, where'd all the life go? Blackwater City, damn, that's always been one of my favorites. I can't wait to stand in a crater. Ooh, Metropolis, truly a classic. No, this is crap. And I don't even like going Commando's menus as it is, but come on, you thought they'd be better by making them the color of sick? And make it so you can't see your selection over empty rings in the quick select management menu? 1 star, Insomniac. Okay, I'm exaggerating for comedy again. Up Your Arsenal isn't terrible, but it just does not come close to the other Ratchet games in my opinion. It really feels like a bare minimum of the Ratchet experience. The skeleton is there, but none of the muscles. The bolted-on aesthetics are here, but none of the grit. So much of the experience just feels like it's straight up missing. Hearing years later about how the game was actually quite rushed makes a lot of sense, truthfully. The low enemy variety, short single-path levels, reuse of arenas, scattered plotting, an entire coat of polish missing. It's pretty easy to tell this didn't get quite a lot of time to cook. Suppose this was all for incorporating the multiplayer mode, was it? Was it worth it? I'm legitimately asking, I never played the multiplayer. Is it even still up? Hang on, let me check. Yeah, I don't think so. Oh well. Maybe I'm just an uppity sort of broad. The game's harmless enough fun, but it lacks the strong, confident identity of those that came before it. 3 games in, it feels like we're already losing the thread. What an underwhelming end to an otherwise solid series. Unless... Might get controversial here, but to me, Ratchet Deadlocked is the real Ratchet 3. I'm serious. I know what you're thinking. Scott, honey, baby, Bubala, you're joking me. This game is literally all of the things you complained about with Up Your Arsenal, but it's worse. And you're telling me it's actually one of the best in the series? Well, yeah, and here's why. Ratchet Deadlocked goes all in. Up Your Arsenal's problem was that it didn't commit. It was a half-assed platformer grafted onto an awkward third-person shooter, which just led to the most mediocre of both worlds. But Deadlocked isn't shilly-shallying between squat. We're here for combat, and by Quark's smooth chassis, we got combat.
Bring it.
Lock strafe right from the get-go. Ooh, fluid snappy strafe jumping for complete control in the air and on the battlefield. Ah, L1 as a jump input? Stop it, I'm swooning. Ratchet Deadlocked is a fast-paced, almost hyperactive shooter, pitting you against dozens upon dozens of enemies at once, and it is awesome. That, my friends, is the Deadlock difference. This game is designed through and through to be as pure an action title as it gets. Jumping, quick select, firing, aiming, everything except for swinging your wrench you'd want to do in combat is on the shoulder buttons, so you never have to lift your thumb off the right stick. Enemies drop ammo now when they die, a series first that keeps the pace up. In single player, you have these two battle bots to help draw aggro, and you're gonna need the help. Every level is a constant onslaught of enemies shooting fast-moving projectiles that will hit you like a truck if you don't stay on the move. I'm not even joking when I compare this game to something like Doom Eternal. Okay, maybe a little exaggerating, but still, it's in that wheelhouse. With the variety of the arena designs, the weapons at your disposal, the enemy behaviors, the bosses, vehicle segments, and the suites of legitimately fun and unique challenges on offer to give your progression a bit more agency, the game stays fresh in every moment, and is an absolute blast in every sense. In fact, the weakest parts of this game are when it shoehorns in some platforming. Look, platforms, we know what those are, you still love us, right? Compared to the other Ratchet games, there are less planets, less weapons, the game itself is notably shorter, but all of this contributes to Deadlock's impeccable focus as a highly concentrated dose of adrenaline. I would much rather have 10 weapons that each have specific uses than 100 weapons that all feel the same. Now I'm picking weapons based on my current situation, not because of any numbers it needs or whatever. But Scott, does this mean the weapons leveling through use system is gone? Well, no, but its iteration here is about as good as it gets. The basics still apply. All your weapons hit harder the more you use them. Every level increases your damage, but also a specific stat kindly specified at the level up screen, which is always a nice bit of transparency. But in Deadlocked, a weapon can go all the way up to level 10, giving you a long time with it before you have to drop it. For this playthrough I did for footage, I only maxed out 2 weapons out of the 10, and both of them were during the final level. Plus, if you buy the Mega Weapons in New Game Plus, those can go up to 99. Damn! It's the same numbers game, but when the numbers go up so high, you can practically ignore them, while consistently feeling rewarded without interrupting the flow of the game, and it makes an additional New Game Plus run almost inevitable. You can also modify and specialize weapons using a variety of weapon mods. Okay, I'll admit this never quite clicked for me. A nice option, I suppose, but I feel like there are a lot of right answers here and what mods should go on what, you know? Cluster bombs on the Arbiter, napalm on the B6 Obliterator, shock on everything else. I think I would have rather liked if these mod effects were just added on naturally to specific weapons through upgrading, or maybe if the customization was pushed even a bit further. But I'm not unhappy with what's here. Nice to add a touch of personalization, a nice push to replay levels and experiment with new combos. Even the vehicle bits are pretty fun, well, most of them are. I could take or leave the hoverbike, and the Landstalker walks about as fast as your mum through a fully stocked bakery. And we really missed an opportunity here for some sort of wall climbing mechanic. But I especially like when the campaign levels don't lock you in a vehicle and let you get out if you feel a need. Makes things feel a bit more organic, you know? I mentioned Doom, but there's a definite whiff of Halo influence about the game, especially with the combat focus and the aforementioned vehicles that are often organically lying around and you can never quite decide if they control well or not. They call this one the Puma. Huh, weird. Looks more like a warthog to me. And then there's the story. I like the Deadlocked story. Maybe I'm biased given how Deadlocked was actually my first Ratchet game, but I still enjoy it. It's not like incredible or super surprising and definitely steeped in the mid-2000s emo.
You're dead, Ace.
But its satire, while probably the least subtle in all the series, is perhaps its most consistent. Sensationalizing and marketing violence as its own sport is something previous games touched on with the combat arenas, but Deadlocked really blows it up with the whole Vox television network. You got the news crew making up fake stories to demonize Ratchet and build hype for his battles. The CEO hyper-focused on marketing with absolutely zero regard to ethics and restraint. The sheer depravity of it all, trying to sell these heartless murderers as icons for kids to buy toys of. Not even hiding how blatantly they're manufacturing all the lies about Ratchet, so people just don't like him as much. It's simple, but over the top in such a fun way. Some of the cutscenes in Deadlocked, swear down, are the best in the series. I'm not kidding. You know, I say fun, it's definitely a bit of a darker game tone-wise than the previous 3. But if anything, I think that sells its points even better. The bad guy feels like a serious threat, the stakes feel authentically high. It's cartoony sci-fi, but it's still raw, violent aggression no matter where you turn. And taking that more seriously adds weight to the atmosphere of the game. The tone feels like it recognizes the gameplay for what it is, and that makes the satire pop even more. Tonally, this is one of the more solid Ratchet games. Like, there's a reason the only time you hear Quark or Nefarious in this game is in ending stingers. Imagine them hamming it up in Drenzone, it would send the tone reeling. It's not emphasized too hard and there's not a lot of it, but the narrative side of Deadlocked ties a nice little bow on one of the most consistently solid visions in the whole series. There are no compromises in what Deadlocked says and what it ultimately is. The game has the same everything goes quality as the first Ratchet game, but in a whole new dimension that lets it stand alone as a great shooter in its own right. Just a shame it's easily the worst PS3 port of the tetralogy. In-engine cutscenes have the characters constantly juddering around every 2 seconds and extremely noticeable clipping issues left, right, and center. The color commentary offered by the announcers is broken outside of what's scripted, so hope you like hearing.
You know, sometimes I think I should have taken that job on Annihilation Nation. They've got a great naval plan.
Every mission. Additionally, switching weapons has the chance to make the game hitch a second, even when it's automatic like on grind rails. And sometimes it won't even switch the weapon, despite appearing to, making this version pretty dissatisfying in every department. And that sucks, cause Deadlocked is a great game. I'm sure I've made that very clear through this video, how much I enjoy it. It's not a perfect game, and when you think of it by the criteria of specifically a Ratchet game, Deadlocked's gonna come up short for you. But Deadlocked isn't designed like a traditional Ratchet game. Even considering it as one just seems wrong. This is purely an action game through and through, and a damn fun one at that. What sets it apart is what makes it so good. To write it off, I think does this game a tremendous disservice. And if nothing else, it is a hearty send-off to this duo's adventures on the PS2. That about wraps things up for the Ratchet & Clank games on PS2. Through all the highs and lows, one thing's for sure. I wasn't the only one these two knuckleheads made an impression on during their time on the platform. And hot on the heels of Deadlocked, a new generation of PlayStation was lifting its big old chunky head over the horizon. Ooh, baby. Imagine what the Ratchet series could do with all that horsepower. Well, we'll get to that in the next episode.